So, hello, Stefan. Great to have you in this conversation. Great to have the chance to do this recording with you. Just to set up a bit of the stage of how we ended up being here on Zoom and talking about a topic that it's extremely interesting, as it's an application of SF in organizations. That was linked to the SF24 conference, and in there we had a panel talking about how do you actually use in different contexts solution-focused concepts. And Alan introduced more about the language and strategy, and Stephanie talked about design thinking, and we had Alan looking at a application that is really day-to-day, which is this SF agenda. And Stefan has a beautiful way of using solution focus in risk management, which is clearly something that it's organizational based. So I would say, first of all, Stefan, I would let you say a bit of your background, a bit about yourself, and then we move into the application itself.
Sure, Cristina. Yes, I'm a professional certified coach. I coach people around the globe as an internal coach. I had more than 800 coaching hours, done more than 100 clients, and I also work as a risk manager in a software company. And you know, risk management is usually problem focused. And then I thought, okay, how can you do it in a solution focused way? Because I experienced as a coach that solution focused is so helpful for our clients. And I thought, even though there might be a way to apply it, and this is what I did over the past couple of years, and I'm still surprised what difference it makes to apply a solution-focused risk assessment compared to the, you know, more, you know, problem-focused assessment as we do it usually.
True, and I think now you're getting into an area that I truly understand. Is that we had a conversation before, and you know a bit that I'm coming out of this wonderful area of audit and compliance, which is truly focused on what went wrong, and I see it, how beautiful it is to turn the table and say, so actually what went well. So what do we need to take from there? What do we want to achieve, and where do you want to get?
Yes, I mean, usually, just to explain it briefly how, let's say, risk management works, there are thousands of methods to do risk management. Usually what to do in project management, the so-called what-if analysis. This means that first you plan a risk assessment, and then you ask yourself, about the condition. So an if, and then you say what could go wrong. And then you say, okay, this would be the consequence. And then you estimate the impact and the probability, and then you find a way to respond to that. So very simple. If it rains, then we will get wet. What is the probability that it rains? You know, what is the impact, and what can we do to make sure that we don't get wet? Very simple way. It's applied around the globe. So all the not all of them, but most of the projects do it that way, and it's extremely useful for problem-focused approaches. So, for example, when we think about technology, you know, if the database doesn't work properly, if the building is blah blah blah, not something like this. This works perfect. And I always sometimes say, unfortunately or fortunately, we are working with human beings, and you can imagine it's not useful to say, you know, it does not work because people are the root cause for the risk or why it's not working, something like this. And this is where the solution-focused approach can be extremely helpful.
I assume it changes the mindset of the people, that it's not only focusing on you as an individual failed, but actually there's turning the perspective into saying, so what actually can be done? We don't get there.
Yes. And the reason for that is very simple, actually, because our engineers, and we are trained to find the root cause. And we are happy that, you know, the engineers find the root cause. Just think of a plane, you know, you'd want to know why the engine failed. You know, you have to really find the root cause. You have to find the little nitty-gritty thing what went wrong, and then you say, okay, this went wrong. You know, we have to replace it and reconstruct it or whatever we have to do, and then have a plan, and then up you go. But when you do it with human beings, to find out why, something went wrong because somebody did, it sounds ridiculous already, but it's sometimes the way of thinking, which, needs to be changed. And I can say with the solution-focused approach, it's much easier.
As we started already talking about this, I would say let's take a step back, so to say, and can you just use a bit of time to introduce how you actually added this solution-focused drops in the soup of risk management, let's say, if you want to take an analogy, because they sound like it was a bit of a magic potion added to
in fact, it was, and sometimes I felt in the lion's den. On one hand, you have solution-focused coaches, and explain to them that you combine somehow. I wouldn't probably combine is not the right word, but you use solution-focused and risk management. So risk management is problem-focused, and then you have solution-focused. And on the other hand, you have engineers, who want to find out the root cause, and then you talk about the future. About the preferred future. What's the preferred future? I have to find the root cause. Okay, how to do that? And actually, it's not that difficult. At first, I think what the key is the stance that everybody wants to do the best to make a project successful. So what I do usually, I explain the standard process. It's very simple. The process is very simple, how it is done, because also for compliance reasons, you need this process. You audit it. And then I say, okay, how would it look? Imagine that, the project goes very, very well, as good as you can imagine. And what would you notice? How would it look like? Imagine whatever the board member, step into your office, says, you did a great job, and then suddenly, you see the eyes, blinking and say, okay, and then to work on that, and then to imagine, how it is, and what do you want to achieve? And then they get a very good picture of how it should be. Of course, we have plans, we have business cases, all these things, but it makes a difference if you do it with a team. And so that's the first step. And then, of course, I go back one step and say, okay, so what can happen? Because people are used to that. Engineers are used to things which can go wrong. So, and they have it in their mind anyway. It mustn't make sense to say there are no risks, no problems. Let's, look into the future. So, okay, and then they say, okay, what could go wrong? And then I start with the traditional if and then sentence, what could go wrong? Do a scaling. People are familiar with that. And so they say, okay, that's it. And what happens next is I say, what could you do to increase the probability to be successful? So to either reduce the probability or the impact, And then, interestingly, people say, oh, I could do this, I could do this, I could do this. And when they say what they could do, so that's the risk response, they write it down. And then I ask them again to scale again, as we would say. And then they find out, oh, I have a regular meeting with somebody, and then the probability that we fail goes down by 50% or something. And then they say, oh, it's really worth doing. So the focus, it's a shift of the focus from the risk to the response. And sometimes, of course, the risks they cannot mitigate because they cannot influence it. And that's fine as well. What happens is that they get a kind of, it's a kind of a safety net. They say, okay, whatever I do, it's not my fault that, if the risk, of course, we fail because of the nature of the risk. We cannot influence it. And this helps the whole team to to calm down.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then people do it, and of course then ask people sometimes, what would you do in the next 24 hours? And because engineers are used to that. When it is in solution focused, sometimes we don't ask those questions, but they expect it actually from, I have to do something, I have to have a plan, I have to have a task list. And usually they would expect to ask, what would you do in the next 2 months?
Mm-hmm.
No, I ask, what we want to do in the next 24 hours. And then usually there's a kind of silence in the room. And then they say, give me a small step, a very small step, a tiny step. And then they say, okay, I'll have lunch with somebody, who is not my friend, but I do it because of the preferred future, what we have defined before.
Mm-hmm.
And then it goes easy, and I don't check what they're doing because I believe, and of course that's my position anyway, that they do it. And that's one thing. And another thing which is extremely useful is that when you work like this, it's a big relief for the people. If somebody says, for example, the performance is too low, or I say the performance is too low, then people would argue, why is it too low? Do you have the right approach and something like that? But if you say, if performance is too low, then we cannot manage whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody can phrase a risk. It's about the future.
Mm-hmm.
And you can have your concerns, and then you will find out when you do the scaling, then you might find that the probability is only 5% that the performance is too low, and then it's fine as well. But for the team, it's an unbelievable step forward, to put it on a table, and it's accepted that you do it that way.
Mm-hmm. I took a couple of notes because I try to keep in mind what are the things that impress me out of things like this. And one of them is language, because I think there's a shift in language. As you said, we're not talking anymore about that's the negative thing. But we're talking also about the positive thing. You're using language that suggests that you can actually alter something, that you can actually have a way of reaching that perfect future, perfect picture, perfect way of having a project run. So this change of language, I think it definitely has an impact on the mindset of the team and how they interact after that with each other, and how they help and support that picture to just actually take place. The other point that impressed me was exactly this thing, like you said, they expect indeed that you ask them, so what is your plan? What are you going to do about it? How do you going to do this? And that's what I experienced also with auditing, is people expect that you allow them to plan, and they do a big thing for the next half a year where they will be able to show you that everything got fixed. And I think that putting it in the perspective and saying, well, actually, what are you going to do in the next 24 hours? The first shock is, but 24 hours is far too less time to do anything. You cannot do anything in 24 hours. And that helps again to make this change of a mindset to say, yeah, 24 hours are 24 hours. But it doesn't mean that you should see it as an impossible thing. You should see it as a tiny step that can be done in any moment. It should not be something that you need to plan for 6 months and then ta-da. But every change can happen with a small step every day. So that's a beautiful way of saying, so that question of solution focus, what are you going to do in the next 24 hours? It's a valuable thing to ask in any context. And the third thing that I took a note here is this way of relieving pressure, or reducing or shifting the pressure. Because like you said, they feel like it's on their shoulders to make sure that everything gets identified as a problem. And by constructing a desired picture of how the project will end up, you shift it to everyone, because it's the responsibility of the entire group.
Exactly. And you separate the problem from the person.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And this is, it's unbelievable how how useful it is. This is and the communication improves without without doing a lot. You just use certain words. Of course, you have to be trained. It's not that easy. Especially when you have competing projects and things like that. Even life is tough, especially in our fast changing environment. But this is such a huge relief. And people say, "Oh, I'll give you a call. I'll give you a call. Let's have a cup of coffee or something like this." And then as a risk manager, coach, everything is great. They will do it. They'll manage it. And that's great.
Do you do also like follow-up sessions, or how do you schedule your work?
Yes, of course, because we have to do follow-ups because of the legal requirements, I would say, or because of compliance reasons, and of course the project managers or product owners, whoever apply this, they have to do that. But I can tell you, even the second session is much, much better when you have done this. You enter the room, people are smiling, people are collaborating, people are, you would not believe that before you started the first session, and there were maybe some competition, because it's always about budget, it's always about time and resources and these kind of things. And they have a chat, have a coffee, and exchange things. The whole atmosphere changes. And then it just goes, like, tuck, 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 I do this. Okay. Yes, we did not follow up because of it. Oh, no problem. We'll fix that. So this is my experience when you do the follow-up sessions. And you would not believe this kind of relationship stays for years. I can tell you, I did assessments a couple of years ago, and people still remember how they did it. And one of the reasons is they feel appreciated. And they are appreciated, of course.
Yeah, so I guess this kind of question, so what has been different or better from the last time we spoke? It's again a question where you feel like the appreciation or the positive vibe in the room just bursts on, or just appears immediately, because they've seen it, how much they could work together.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's a beautiful way of saying. So instead of investing a lot of resources in getting people to just do trainings and courses where they learn how to communicate, help them to understand how they can work together by being in an environment that allows them that.
Yes, and you get you have learned it immediately when you do the assessment, in a solution focused way. You can skip the communications training, because you did the communication training already, and so you learn it on the fly, without reading books or something like this. Just by doing it with a coach.
And then I realized now, one of the things that I've picked up, or I've noticed in doing subsequent sessions with teams, is that they pick up also the language of solution focus. So they talk in terms of future, they talk in terms of best hopes, they pick up those things. What is your experience with that one?
Yes, it's like, having good clients. They tell me, now probably you, and I know they tell me that now you ask, what are your best hopes from this session? And I say, that's a good question. If you want to have this question, then ask this question. So they, and this is what changes, and they change the language. Instead of, this goes wrong, and this is, what can we do, what can be fixed, what is future oriented, these kind of things. And I fully agree, that's extremely helpful. So it's just a natural way of applying it.
Wonderful. As we're getting, as we said, we try to keep it in a amount of time that it's easy for anyone to listen to it, and we can do any kind of questions after that, or follow-up discussions. What are the things a couple of things that you said, what can anyone do in the next 24 hours, in the next week, that you take as concepts or as small hints?
At first, not to be afraid of you know, living in a problem-focused world and to do solution-focused. That's one of those things. And then you would ask, what do you want to be instead? You know, try it out. Try to find out how you can apply solution-focused in a problem-focused way. Because it's easy, and what can you change in your language? Focus on the language, and, you know, believe in the team. They can pick up the solution-focused way easily, as you said before. They pick up the language, they pick up the behavior, and it makes our lives so, you know, much easier.
Well, that's a beautiful thing of concluding upon, that indeed solution focus has an impact of on how we run not only organizations, but also on how we run our lives and how we create the future in general. Beautiful.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Stefan. We're gonna post this one on all of the channels where Solution for SF24 was also promoted, so everyone can have access to it. And I will be happy if we can continue the conversation, or if we can also think in mind that we do a SF24 conference in 2021 also. So there's also space then to see what emerges, what else emerges in your work.
Yeah, can do so. Sure, looking forward to it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.